Welcome to the SmartRisk demo. Before we get into the software, I want to give you a little bit of background on the company. Covisum builds software tools that help advisors add value to clients' lives. And the primary reason we do that is because we want to help you grow. When you have tools and processes in place to use real insights and in turn add real value to clients' lives, you can better retain your current clients, and you can also use that value in your marketing to grow your business. The first product we launched was in 2011. It was called Social Security Timing. Many of you are probably still using that tool today. It's in use by tens of thousands of advisors across the country to identify optimal Social Security claiming decisions for their clients. The second product we launched was in February of 2016. It was called Tax Clarity. And Tax Clarity helps you identify situations where the tax that your client expects to pay is not at all aligned with the tax they would actually pay when they harvest a capital gain or take an extra dollar out of a retirement account. Oftentimes those impacts are significant. When we as advisors can identify those impacts and communicate them well to the client, we can help them avoid pitfalls that can cost them thousands of dollars, or we can often identify opportunities to save thousands of dollars just by virtue of making tax-smart contributions or withdrawals from retirement accounts or non-qualified accounts. But you're here today for SmartRisk. I'll take you through the software and show you how to use it, but just as importantly, why to use it. There are two ongoing studies, significant studies that have been published for several years. The first was called Vanguard's Advisor Alpha. And Vanguard basically identified that behavioral coaching, one of the central roles of a financial advisor, is actually worth 1.5% per year in alpha, if you will, or the value that an advisor delivers to their client. A totally separate study that's been running since 1984 is called the Dalbar study. And Dalbar said that voluntary investor underperformance costs clients 1.5% annually. So what do I mean by behavioral coaching or voluntary investor underperformance? The fact is our guts generally tell us to do some of the worst things we could possibly do when it comes to investing. And our guts are pre-programmed under times of stress to make those gut decisions. So our job as financial advisors is to really set reasonable expectations for the client, help manage those client emotions. That's a core part of our job. And we created SmartRisk for one overarching reason, and that is that risk software in the market today is based on outdated math. And that math dramatically underestimates risk, which really sets us up for failure in the next big dip. So today is about seeing the software in action, but understanding the difference in models, the difference between old models of market behavior and newer models of market behavior, which are often referred to as heavy-tailed models. That's really central to the value that SmartRisk delivers. So after you watch the demo today, you'll get an email with a link to read our white paper explaining the importance of a heavy-tailed model. Heavy-tailed models do a much better job of demonstrating the fact that extreme market events happen far more than traditional models would predict, and these are the times when our clients are most tempted to make bad decisions. In other words, these are the times when our role as advisor is most valuable. With that, let's dive into the software. We'll give you a quick walkthrough and explain how to use SmartRisk in your everyday practice. When you first log into the software, this is where you're going to land. You're going to have the opportunity to customize it. You notice I've put the logo for my registered investment advisor firm here up in the corner. I've changed the site theme just so it matches better, so that when I am putting this up on a screen in my conference room, it's going to be a really clean, easy, on-brand demonstration to the client. So I've gone ahead and done those customizations already. The second thing that I've done ahead of this today is entered a couple of model portfolios. And what model portfolios allow us to do is to make a comparison. So with any new prospective client, we're going to be entering client data in order to show them the risk that is in their current portfolio. oftentimes we'll want to compare that to the portfolio that we may recommend. And so in order to do that, I have to enter my model portfolios in advance. So I've just done a couple of sample model portfolios today. These are, of course, not the models that we use in our practice, but Ag Sally is just Barclays Aggregate Bond Index, the ETF, and it's 100%. And my second model is Burke Baby. We're here in Omaha, so this is Baby Burke shares, Burke.B, that's Berkshire Hathaway. And so basically you can kind of think of Baby Burke or Burke Baby as an all-stock portfolio and Ag Sally as an all-bond portfolio. I'm going to use those in the demonstration today. We'll walk you through what it takes to add a client. If you're a Redtail user, you can simply click the Redtail Import button, and you'll be able to search through your Redtail database and import all the client data, including all of their portfolio holdings. For now, we'll assume that you're not a Redtail user, and we'll walk through what it takes to enter a client manually. So I'm going to go to a client that I've already entered. This is going to be Teresa and Michael Sample here. So with Teresa and Michael, I've gone ahead and entered their basic information, first and last name, they're married. You notice we are actually representing the risk to the household, not just to the individual. That's a really significant differentiator because oftentimes it will make sense even though you might have a mister maybe who's more conservative and he's a little older, it might make sense to manage his portfolio in line with the household risk tolerance rather than his own risk tolerance, so long as you can communicate and discuss that. There's a variety of reasons for doing so. Maybe we're going to withdraw from his portfolio sooner or later. So if we're going to withdraw from his portfolio sooner, we might want that portion of the portfolio to be more conservative. If we're going to withdraw from it later, we might want that portion to be more aggressive. So that's the first notable thing, is that you're actually doing risk at the household level. The next thing that we would have entered after entering Michael and Teresa's basic information is the investment portfolios. So I've imported these from Redtail, but you notice this first one just has, it's actually a closed account. The second one we've imported here has quite a few holdings. So we've got symbol and quantity. Now from any statement, you could enter in symbol and quantity and get to the same place. The other thing that we can do, how often have you had a client bring in a statement from a month ago or 2 months ago or sometimes 6 months ago, and that statement doesn't have quantities, doesn't have the number of shares. Instead, it only has the market value. And so what we may want to do is enter in the symbol and the market value as of the statement date. So once we've entered in our symbols and market value for the portfolio, and you see there's quite a few holdings here, so we'll go ahead and get those entered, and we'll do that for each account the client has. So next, we'll enter the non-qualified account, and so on and so forth. It's going to walk me through in a wizard fashion each of the steps that I need to take in order to get this client completely entered. Should take me between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on how extensive the client's accounts are in order to get those entered. So now we're on to Michael's accounts. Again, I've imported them, but you can also manually enter them, or you can upload a comma-separated value if you're exporting it from some other software. That is another method for being able to bring that in. So finally, we're on the Risc Questionnaire. Now, the importance of the Risc Questionnaire is interesting because it's less about the questionnaire and more about the conversation. If I'm sitting with my client, I'm going to be talking with them about what would make them panic. And I'm going to explain to them that this is an important conversation because the worst thing that I can do as their advisor is put them in a position where they are likely to panic. And what I want to do is use this conversation as a stake in the ground, as a point that I can reference back to. In fact, I will tell the client, I'm going to remind you of this. If the market goes in the tank, you may call. And when you call, this is the conversation that I'm going to remind you of to say, when we talked about this, you said that, in your $650,000 portfolio, if you lost in a quarter, if you had a quarterly statement that came back with a $100,000 loss, that you could stand that you would be comfortable, that you would not push to make changes, because oftentimes the changes we're tempted to make in times of stress are the worst changes we could possibly make. And we also talked about, what does a really bad year look like to you? In this case, a really bad year looks like $200,000. So round number, that's about 30% decline. So if a statement came back, a quarterly statement came back 15% down, the client can handle that. If it came back 30% down, the client can handle that on an annual basis. So that's the importance of the conversation, is actually being able to refer back to that point in time, use the report that we'll generate later as a reference point to remind the client that they're hiring you as a behavioral coach. They're hiring you to be the steady hand during the times of market stress. And if you have that conversation on the front end, then when it comes time on the back end, when we actually do get the dip, then you can be the steady hand and you will have prepared them for it. In other words, practice makes perfect. Really, it's about getting them to think about the dip before the dip happens. So that said, we're going to go ahead and run our analysis. We've got all our assets in, and we've just had the risk conversation with the client. You're going to notice a few things about this screen. Right off the gates, we're going to see a few alerts over here. Your risk is too high compared to preference. Reward to risk, no issues, and no single name concentration. So we're not worried about that. But what do we mean by your risk is too high compared to preferences? Let's take a look here on the portfolio risk graph. There are two basic measurements here. One is at a quarterly level and one is at an annual level. Why do we have two basic measurements at a quarterly and an annual level? Well, your client gets statements on a quarterly basis, and on an annual basis, at least, I would hope that you are meeting with them, doing a review, resetting expectations, and updating any part of their financial plan that needs to be updated on at least an annual basis. And so those are the two time frames that we chose to focus on. There are several parts to this graph. The blue line represents the average return on a quarterly basis. Sometimes these are going to look a little low to you because oftentimes in marketplace communications, you'll see average returns that are actually just an arithmetic average. This is a geometric average return. In other words, it's the compound annual growth rate or compound equivalent over the last 10-year period that you would expect to earn off these assets or off these portfolio. Now, the red bar with no lines is what is the actual downside risk of the portfolio? What does a really bad quarter look like for this portfolio? The gray shaded area is what did the client say they were comfortable with in terms of downside risk exposure. So we can clearly see if the gray stripe area is their comfort level and red is where they're actually out, this client is taking more risk than they've indicated they'd be comfortable with. Over on the right-hand side, you see the same story. On an annual basis, they're comfortable with more risk, but again, their actual risk in their portfolio is exceeding what they're comfortable with. Now, the drawdown analysis below says if we had held these assets through 2008, 2009, actually through March of 2009, what would this portfolio have done? Now, of course, some tools rely on this as the primary mechanism for showing drawdown or showing what a bad period would look like. I'm not an advocate of that. Why? Because so many of your clients will hold assets in their portfolio that simply didn't exist. So in order to do this drawdown chart, they have to make a bunch of assumptions. The second major reason I'm not real comfortable with using the drawdown as the primary method for evaluating risk is because the economic circumstances that preceded the last significant dip in the market are not the same economic circumstances that will precede the next. In other words, we don't have any level of certainty that the past is really prelude to the future. And that's why these two together, one estimation of risk based on a model that is reasonably likely to represent the future, and a second historical check, if you will, to ensure that our model adequately represents reality. That's why you have both of those available to the client. Now, the fourth item here on the page is the asset interaction. Now, this is completely unique to SmartRisk. I'm going to ask you a simple question as an advisor, and I want you to think about it. That question is, how do you know the portfolios you develop are diversified? Why do we diversify in the first place? We diversify to reduce risk, to reduce idiosyncratic risk specifically. Our goal is to make sure that all of our portfolio assets don't move together, specifically during times of stress. And yet the way we've constructed portfolios historically has been based on correlation matrices. In other words, during all times, do our assets move together or do they offset each other to some level? Well, those correlation matrices, they're based off of all time. They're not based specifically off of times of stress. And as anybody who was in the business in 2008, 2009 knows, stocks and bonds move together. The diversification that we expected didn't happen. Is that because there was no possibility of diversifying? Absolutely not. It's because our understanding of diversification was not strong enough. So what the asset interaction chart actually says is during times of stress, in other words, if we were in the middle of this drawdown, what percentage of our overall portfolio risk would have been diversified away by holding the assets we hold together? Now, if 16% or less of that were diversified away, we would consider it a focused portfolio. Anywhere above 16 to 60, we consider a diversified portfolio. And anywhere above 60, we consider a hedged portfolio. Is one better than another? Absolutely not. I mean, if we knew that the next 5 years would be a bull market, we would want to be focused. We'd want to be in all growth assets, right? If we knew that the next 6 months were going to be absolutely terrible, we might want to be in a hedged portfolio where all the movements of all our assets perfectly offset each other. But in good times, we certainly wouldn't want to be in a hedged portfolio. And in bad times, we certainly wouldn't want to be in a focused portfolio. So ultimately, this is informational. It's to help a client understand whether or not their portfolio is diversified based on real risk metrics, not based on just simply the number of holdings they have or a portfolio X-ray to determine whether or not they have multiple funds with the same holdings. It's a more mathematically robust method for measuring diversification. And if you'd like an article on that, we're happy to provide that as well. So that's the practical layout of the screen. Let's talk about how you use this in a client meeting. Now, oftentimes clients will have multiple accounts. They may have an IRA, they may have a Roth, they may have a non-qualified account. You may have a married couple where each has an IRA or a Roth or a non-qualified account. And you as an advisor may have different goals, or in a retirement income plan, you might have a different spending order for those accounts. So in this case, all of my accounts are actually invested very similarly. So if I click on any one account, what I'll see is that the risk properties of any one account are really reflective of the risk properties of the household. You notice it looks extremely similar, right? If I click on a different account, it's again going to look extremely similar. You're not going to see much difference. Now, let's say though that I wanted to reallocate this client's accounts in order to bring their risk tolerance more in line. What I would do is I can choose to compare portfolios and I can reallocate to different models by account. Now in this case, our first account here is a Roth. So maybe I'm going to put really aggressive assets. I'm going to put all Berkshire Hathaway in the Roth. Why? Because I know that the likelihood of the client spending those assets during their lifetime is very small. So I can be really aggressive in that account with the expectation that being aggressive is likely to return more in terms of what will be left over for their kids or the causes they care about after they're gone. Now, I might do the same thing in his Roth, but at the same time, I might know that this last account, this non-qualified account, is the account they're going to spend from early in retirement. So I want to make that really conservative. So I'm going to take that one to Barclays Aggregate Bond Index. So now I'm going to compare. A couple of things that I'm going to notice. I'm going to see side by side the risk in the current portfolio alongside the risk in the proposed portfolio. I might notice, okay, my alert's gone. Now my risk is in line with the client's preferences. You notice the gray bars extend below the red, the actual portfolio risk. So that's a good thing. We've reduced the risk overall. There's a couple of other things that I noticed though. Remember my average return over here on a quarterly basis, 0.76, 2.8 on an annual. Over here it's 0.98 on a quarter and 3.75 on an annual. So I noticed that. I also notice that my downside risk, my range of reality is tighter. So I'm actually able to present a tighter range of possibilities to the client. I'll scroll down and we'll see the drawdown analysis. Had I held this proposed basket or this proposed portfolio, I would have had a significantly lesser drawdown than I would have had in the event I held what they were currently holding. And finally, I noticed that my diversification index, my asset interaction index, actually went up. In other words, during times of stress, and you see it played out right here, during times of stress, this portfolio is more likely to offset some of the holdings, the movement of some of the holdings with the movement of other holdings. So in total, what was I able to do through this process? First off, I was able to have a conversation with the client about what their downside risk exposure actually is. I was able to have a conversation that prepared them for that. So even if I make no changes, I still have a post in the ground that I can refer back to whenever I do an annual review or whenever the client gets a quarterly statement. So through this process, what have I been able to do? I've been able to identify a situation where a client was in a position where they may have panicked in the absence of this behavioral coaching. I've been able to identify a mechanism for reducing their risk and bringing it in line with their tolerance. I've been able to check that against a historical period that is representative of the kind of things we're looking to protect against. And finally, I've been able to demonstrate for them that their portfolio is in fact more diversified than it was before. So ultimately, I've been able to set a stake in the ground that will allow me to have great conversations with my clients. In other words, allow me to retain clients through the next dip. Now, once this process is in place in my practice, I really have the ability to go out and market very differently than other advisors. What do I mean by that? To the extent that most people dramatically underestimate the risk that is in their portfolio, when I'm able to show them why they're likely to underestimate the risk in their portfolio, and when I'm able to show them why, on average, 1.5% per year of portfolio return is lost to voluntary investor underperformance. In other words, to the fact that we as people are hardwired to make poor decisions, and my job, Mr. Client, is to be a behavioral coach. First off, it's to help you understand the risks that you're taking. Second, manage those risks. And third, during times of stress, to be the hand that holds you through those times of risk and keeps you from making the gut decisions that are so often bad for us in the long term. Those are my role as an advisor, and I'm able to use this tool to communicate how I will fulfill on that promise. Of course, I can click the Generate PDF button, and I'm going to be able to generate a paper report. If you're more comfortable using a paper report in front of the client, for us in our practice, we're doing this on a screen. We're really only generating the paper report to either go in a client binder if it's an initial engagement, or to go as part of the annual review record so that we've got that on file and we're able to refer to it later. So of course we can generate that PDF report. That report is going to have your logo front and center on it. It'll be all customized to your firm, and of course you can include custom disclosures on the report as well. The report is also FINRA reviewed. So when you're ready to take your practice to the next level in terms of communicating risk and developing a service model that is focused on helping clients understand the risk that they're taking and helping you align the client's investments based on their risk, when you're ready to help them achieve that extra 1.5% that the typical investor leaves on the table, SmartRisk is certainly a mechanism for doing so. You can register for a free trial on our website, Covisum.com. Thanks so much.